From Dexter Morgan to Frank Lundy, these are some of the smartest and dumbest characters in Dexter. Starting with number 5 on the most intelligent list, Deborah Morgan. Without a doubt, Deborah Morgan was an incredibly smart woman. Some people believe that she was an idiot because it took her so long to realize that her own brother, Dexter, was a killer, but that is not at all indicative of her intelligence. Deborah was too blinded by her love for her brother, who was her only remaining family member, to suspect him of being a killer, and Dexter was a skilled liar. She was also traumatized by her near-deadly engagement to the ice truck killer. She didn't want to assume everyone she loved was a fraud and a murderer. If not for those factors, there is no doubt that she would have discovered what Dexter really was sooner. Beyond all of that, Deb was brilliant. Her rise through the ranks at Miami Metro is a testament to this fact. When we first meet Deborah, she is working Vice on the street as a normal uniformed officer, but she was always hungry for more. She wanted to become a detective and wouldn't stop until she became one. She had a keen eye for case details and an unmatched ability to sniff out facts and theories that other, more seasoned detectives could not. These skills are what would earn Deb her shield, and eventually catapult her to the rank of lieutenant of the force. One clear example of Deb's mental acuity is showcased in her solving of the Skinner case in season 3. She was a central figure in resolving. The Skinner case revolved around a serial killer thought to be targeting individuals connected to a local drug dealer named Freebo. Throughout this season, Deb relentlessly pursued any lead possible. She was already dedicated to solving the case, but her determination was heightened once Anton Briggs, her boyfriend at the time, was kidnapped by the Skinner. After that, Deborah worked closely with her partner, Detective Joseph Quinn, to catch the killer. They were able to connect the dots between the Skinner's victims, all of whom were questioned about Freebo's whereabouts. But it was her work that really made the case. Her instincts lead her to suspect George King, a seemingly harmless tree trimmer whose name continued to come up during witness interviews. She was the one who realized that each of the victims had trimmed trees near their yards when they went missing. Deborah broke that case wide open with nothing but her gut, a few pictures, and sheer force of will. Despite pressure from superiors to follow other leads, Deborah remained focused. Her persistence paid off when she discovered that King had a criminal past under a different name and a history of violence, including a similar MO in his past home of Nicaragua as a part of the country's army. This breakthrough confirmed her suspicions that King was in fact the Skinner. Deborah's investigative work led the department right to George King, though he would meet his end when Dexter got to him first. Even so, Deborah's determination, intuition, and refusal to back down were the key elements that solved the case for Miami Metro's records. As a result of this, and much of her hard work on other cases, Deb was eventually promoted to lieutenant by a begrudged Captain Maria LaGuerta. It was never clearer that Deborah deserved respect as well as the promotion she later received. And this was only one of the cases she solved almost single-handedly. If not for her naivety and occasional recklessness, Deb would be ranked higher. Regardless, she is clearly one of the smartest detectives on the force at Miami Metro. And though she wasn't the smartest character in the entire series, Deb's intelligence outweighed her brother's by a long shot. What can we say about Dexter? And why is he not number 1 on this list? Simply put, Dexter, while incredibly intelligent, was not as slick as he thought he was. He is by no means an idiot. In fact, in Dexter Original Sin, we learned that he was on track to enter medical school after a very successful tenure as a pre-med undergrad student. And even as a member of the Miami Metro Homicide Department's forensic team, he was an outstanding and irreplaceable addition. Dexter was an all-star blood spatter analyst and forensics investigator in general. His work was beyond refute, and he was even able to use those skills to aid him in his stalk and kill ritual many times. But in the end, his superb abilities were not enough to save him from being detected by many people. Like his brother, Dexter was able to operate as a serial killer for years without being exposed. However, unlike his brother, he had people telling him for quite a while. In fact, even after years of being an active killer, Dexter had many people figure him out. Doak suspected him, Maria suspected him, and Angela Bishop of Iron Lake eventually found him out as well. And that's not to mention the unconfirmed suspicions of Agent Lundy, Camilla Figg, and Detective Quinn. Dexter even spurred an entire FBI manhunt after the bodies he tried to hide in the ocean were discovered by divers. Of course, that isn't his fault exactly, but other killers such as his brother Brian and the Trinity Killer somehow managed to get away with their crimes and with no official investigations for much longer than he did. Dexter was able to get the upper hand on most of the people who came too close to him, but he was far too emotional to keep his secret under wraps as his father's code dictated. He even went as far as to expose himself willingly to people who he sought to have a deeper connection with. He shared his secret with Miguel Prado, Lumen Pierce, Hannah McKay, and even his own son, just so he could foster a closer relationship with them. He made himself increasingly vulnerable by doing so, acting against the code that his father created for him anytime he saw fit. Any of these people could have turned him in at any time, compromising his entire life and freedom. Additionally, he made the mistake of keeping trophies, even after his father explicitly told him not to. The blood slides Dexter kept were inextricably tied to the destruction of his entire life. First, Dokes found them in his apartment. Later, Maria found one at Travis Marshall's crime scene, and eventually Deb found them in his apartment again. At a certain point, Dexter should have known better than to keep stockpiling trophies. He constantly put himself and his family at risk by collecting blood slides, but he just couldn't help himself. In this way, and many others, Dexter showed that he was not all that bright. Capable and manipulative? Yes. But the smartest? No. He failed himself and everyone around him constantly, all for his own gratification and so he could fulfill his desire to kill and continue to keep trophies. If that isn't a sign of a lack of intelligence, then what is? By some miracle, Dexter Morgan has managed to stay alive, and we will see him again in Dexter Resurrection this summer. But many of his actions indicate a lack of understanding and comprehension that has kept him from reaching the top of this list. Had he made smarter choices to conceal his true identity, he'd be ranked higher. But really, it was just a lot of happenstance and dumb luck that kept him alive, not his own choices. Dexter was arguably more reckless than his sister and was unreasonably selfish in his behavior, so much so that he endangered several of the people he loved and got them killed. Rita, Dokes, LaGuerta, Logan, even his own sister Deb, all died because of his dumb decisions. In the end, his ignorance and selfishness resulted in the death of so many innocents. Had he been smarter, perhaps their lives would have been spared. In fact, it was Dexter's idiocy and fallibility that would lead to him to fear one of the smartest characters in the show, Special Agent Frank Lundy. Frank Lundy was one of the most impressive characters in the entire series. He was introduced as the best manhunter in the FBI, and it stood true. It's arguable that he may have been onto Dexter, but was not able to prove anything. Lundy knew how to track down killers and recognize them for who they truly were with incredible accuracy. Had he not been killed prematurely, he may have even discovered Dexter's true identity, just as he had done with so many other murderers before. He recognized the darkness within Dokes, even with very little information, and was able to track the path of the Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell, against the advice of the FBI. Lundy found Trinity anyway, and had he not been killed, he most likely would have gotten to the truth of Arthur's deeds and maybe even Dexter's. It's almost as if the writers had to kill him off, lest he expose Dexter for what he really was too early on in the show. Frank Lundy's greatest feat was discovering the Trinity Killer. Trinity was incredibly meticulous, but so was Frank. He came out of retirement solely to continue tracking Trinity's murder cycle, and he had no intention of letting up. Lundy penned Trinity after recognizing a three-part ritualistic pattern of murders that no one else was able to connect. First, a young woman would be left to bleed out in a bathtub. Then, a mother of two would be forced to jump to her death. And lastly, a man would be found bludgeoned to death, all in very specific locations. He noticed the murders followed this cycle very strictly and occurred over many decades, transitioning from city to city. Lundy correctly predicted that Trinity was most likely in Miami based on the timeline of his previous murders. No one else ever even came close to knowing this much about the elusive killer. Dexter was the one who realized that there was actually a fourth part of the pattern. While initially observing Trinity with his own deadly intentions, Dexter witnessed him abduct a young boy. This didn't fit Lundy's established pattern and led Dexter to realize there was a fourth victim type, a child buried alive at the sites Arthur worked at building houses. Though Lundy was not yet privy to this fact of the pattern, there is little doubt that he would have figured it out very soon had he lived. After a brief and unexpected encounter with a noticeably nervous Arthur Mitchell, Frank recognized him as a suspicious figure and planned to tell him and follow up. Unfortunately, this is what would lead to Lundy's death. Before he could confirm Trinity's identity, Lundy was shot and killed by the killer's secret love child, Christine Hill. She learned that the homicide department was getting close to arresting her father, whom she loved against all reason. This led her to shoot Frank and Deborah one night, desperately trying to protect her father's secret and earn his acceptance. While Deborah would survive the shooting, Lundy died on the scene. Though Lundy made the only significant progress in tracking Trinity, he was unable to complete his investigation due to his death. This ultimately allowed Dexter to be the one to take Trinity out, but it was Lundy who had put him on the police department's radar in the first place. In this way, even in death, Lundy can be credited with Trinity's downfall. He had a mind unlike any other, and everyone around him knew it. Lundy went out of his way to track killers at the expense of his own life, and he was still more intelligent than Quinn, a man who would never make such a sacrifice. Joseph Quinn was introduced as a dirty cop, but had the development that we all hoped for. He became quite the endearing character and left fans begging for more. The thing that set Quinn apart from most other antagonists is that he knew when to back off. He was not interested in compromising his own safety for anything, including exposing Dexter, which is most likely why he survived to see another day. After he knew that something was up with Dexter, he followed him just as Sergeant Dokes had. He employed the help of an ex-cop, Stan Liddy, in order to get to the bottom of what Dexter was up to. Essentially acting as a PI, Liddy began tracking Dexter with Quinn paying him to report back what he found. Through a series of stakeouts and dirty tricks, Liddy was eventually able to discover that Dexter was working with Lumen Pierce on something nefarious, though he wasn't sure what exactly. Because of his love for Deborah, Quinn soon demanded that Liddy end the investigation, but it was bigger than him at that point, and Liddy had his own motivations. So while Quinn backed off, Liddy did not. As usual, this led to Liddy being killed by Dexter. Quinn, on the other hand, made it out of the ordeal alive. He wasn't stupid enough to continue to pursue Dexter, but he was stupid in plenty of other ways. His immaturity outweighed his street smarts many times. For instance, when he was upset about his breakup with Deborah, he showed up drunk to her housewarming party, acting like an idiot. He then aggressively hit on Angel's sister and was promptly punched in the face by the sergeant. Quinn had a tendency to behave like an asshole whenever he was upset. He also lost his gun after sleeping with a woman he couldn't even remember, and constantly antagonized his superiors with stupid decisions. One time, he even left Angel, his own partner, to be abducted by the Doomsday Killer. Overall, while Quinn is not the stupidest character in the series, and is certainly smart enough to keep himself alive, he has a pattern of senseless and selfish behavior that exposes just how stupid he really is. In the end, Quinn was more than willing to abandon his investigation into Dexter to save his life and relationships, unlike the captain of the homicide department, Maria LaGuerta. And still, in many ways, she was far more intelligent than he was. The skill set Maria LaGuerta held was varied, unexpected, and unparalleled. With each passing season, she continued to rise through the ranks of the department and was unfaltering in her confidence. She may have been underestimated by the men at Miami Metro, but that never slowed her down. Maria wasn't the sweetest person in her department by any means, but that was most likely because she knew it would only slow her down. She was even downright nasty to other women in her field. She constantly tore down Deborah's confidence and even went as far as sleeping with another woman's fiance while she worked with her at Miami Metro. This was no doubt done to help her secure her own dominance in the department. One thing about Maria is that she knew how to play the game. Police politics were her area of expertise, and that did not detract from her abilities as a detective either. She was incredibly perceptive and had a gut that you'd be a fool not to trust on almost every case. On her climb to the top of the corporate ladder, Maria kicked several people down without blinking an eye, Esme Pascal being the first, who Maria was willing to drive into a frenzy just so she could steal her job back, all while pretending to be the woman's friend. After that, she consistently undercut her own captain, Thomas Matthews, before stealing his job and forcing him into retirement. All this while framing Deborah Morgan as the real perpetrator against Captain Matthews. Everything was working out for her until she got too close to discovering Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher. This is something she was able to do because she was such a capable and dogged detective. Unfortunately for her, much like most people who caught on to Dexter, that private investigation would be her downfall. After investigating the crime scene of Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer, and Dexter's latest victim at the time, Maria discovered a bloodslide that mirrored the signature of the Bay Harbor Butcher. Because of her relationship with Sergeant James Dokes, she was never fully convinced that he was a serial killer, let alone the Butcher. So, with as little provocation as a bloodslide on the scene, her desire to clear Dokes' name was reinvigorated. From there, she was like a dog with a bone. She put in hours outside of her normal work, limited the list of potential suspects, and interrogated anyone she needed to in order to find the real Bay Harbor Butcher. While she had her suspect list narrowed down to Dexter, against all advice from her fellow officers, Maria continued to follow her own instincts, and she was absolutely correct to do so. After all of the evidence pointed to Dexter, and she wasn't going to abandon her own intelligence to play the politics game anymore. First, she pushed for the early release of Hector Estrada, one of the men that killed Dexter's mother. Next, she lured Dexter to kill Estrada by making it well known that he would be out of prison soon. Finally, she tracked them to the very shipping yard Dexter was rescued from as a child, correctly predicting that Dexter would bring Estrada there to conduct his kill ritual. Dexter was able to escape by the skin of his teeth before Maria located them, but that didn't disprove her theory, and she arrested Dexter the next day. LaGuerta was truly a mind to be reckoned with. Always calculating, always 3 steps ahead of her opponent, until, of course, she wasn't. She would meet her end at the hands of Dexter and Deborah, but not before she was able to prove herself that she wasn't crazy. She died knowing that Dokes was innocent and with an impressive record at the department under her belt to boot. The fact of the matter is that Maria LaGuerta was one of the smartest characters in the Dexter universe, but she had a deep relationship with one of the dumbest characters in the show, Miguel Prado, a man who, even as a community leader, lacked basic common sense. Miguel entered the series after his younger brother, Oscar Prado, was found murdered inside a local drug dealer's house. In the process of stalking his latest victim, Dexter encountered Oscar, who spontaneously attacked him. Of course, Dexter got the upper hand and ended up killing the man. The next morning, Miami Metro Homicide was on the scene and Miguel was with them. He was the well-known ADA in Miami and wanted to be hands-on in his brother's case. The police department mistakenly believed the murderer to be the drug dealer Oscar had been visiting at the time of his death, a dirtbag that went by the street name Freebo. Freebo was suspected in the murders of 2 women already, so the assumption seemed logical. And Freebo went on the run after Oscar's death, making him look even more guilty. No one, including Miguel, would have assumed that it was actually Dexter who killed Oscar. Dexter needed to keep it that way, so he had to hunt Freebo down before the truth could be revealed to authorities. But Miguel was also hunting Freebo, hell-bent on avenging his brother's death by any means. Dexter, of course, found Freebo first and killed him one rainy night. What Dexter didn't realize is that Miguel was hot on Freebo's trail as well and had tracked the dealer to the same location that very night. Just as Dexter killed Freebo, he realized he wasn't alone and went outside to find Miguel confused, wet, and holding a gun. Dexter made up a lie, saying he killed Freebo in self-defense. Miguel believed him and thanked Dexter for killing the man he thought had killed Oscar. From that point forward, Miguel was insistent on having a relationship with Dexter. Dexter tried to shake him, but Miguel had a hard time taking no for an answer and continued to force his way into Dexter's life. Miguel Prado's downfall stemmed from his increasing corruption and overconfidence. After discovering Dexter's secret life as a serial killer, Miguel was dumb enough to think he could or should have the same. Miguel initially bonded with Dexter over their shared desire for vigilante justice, but Miguel crossed even Dexter's vague moral line when he killed an innocent defense attorney, Ellen Wolf. He killed her simply because she was a problem for him in court, a thorn in his side. As his thirst for power and control grew, he became increasingly reckless and tried to manipulate Dexter, which was of course a fool's errand in the end. After he killed Ellen Wolf and lied to Dexter about incriminating evidence in Freebo's killing, Dexter realized that Miguel was dangerous and ultimately saw no choice but to eliminate him before he killed more innocent people. Miguel may have been a high-powered attorney, but his judgment was more than just clouded, it was stupid. He should have known better than to try to operate outside of the law. He should have known better than to trust Dexter, a man he knew was a trained killer and a liar. The first time Miguel killed someone without Dexter's help, he kind of pulled it off, but his methods were so unrefined and his motive was so obvious that even Maria LaGuerta figured out that he had done it. It was his own hubris and idiocy that led him to believe that he could do what Dexter did. In the end, Miguel's moronic proximity to a murderer is what led to his demise. He had no one to blame but himself.
Don't let the fancy title of assistant district attorney fool you. Stupid people end up in powerful positions all the time.
Miguel Prado, while refined and determined, was incredibly stupid. Dumber even than the most perverted character of the show, Vince Masuka.
Vincent Masuka is arguably the smartest and most qualified member of the Miami Metro forensics team. During his time with Miami Metro, Masuka was so good at his job that he even undermined some of Dexter's own plans. On more than one occasion, Masuka had Dexter sweating as the killer tried to outmaneuver a man he should have seen as his professional equal. When Dexter needed to avoid detection from the FBI as the Bay Harbor Butcher, it was Vince Masuka who almost brought him down in the most unexpected way, through the collection of rock samples from Dexter's marina that almost anyone else, including Dexter himself, would have ignored. Masuka was on the brink of discovering Dexter's true identity as the Butcher. Even when Dexter tried to destroy the evidence by breaking the filled morgue's air conditioning, Vince was 2 steps ahead. He, along with Agent Lundy, had already sent the soil samples to a secure lab, protecting them from Dexter's attempted sabotage. Though Dexter was eventually able to frame Sergeant James Dokes as the Bay Harbor Butcher, that was not through a failure of Masuka's intellect. What's more, that is not the only way that Vince showed his mental bona fides. In fact, throughout his career at Miami Metro, Vince became a man of many hats. He was published in a highly respected forensics journal for his original analysis in the field. He was asked to speak at a major conference for the same, and he became an accredited professor and mentored up-and-coming forensics students. He was so smart that he had interns training under him at the department. He may have made a few poor judgment calls on who those interns were, but he was still entrusted with the minds of the upcoming class of forensics analysts. Masuka was smart enough to hone their skills and abilities. If he had managed to circumvent the theft his own interns plotted against the department or caught on to Dexter like Brian, Dokes, and Maria had, he may have earned the number 1 spot because his mind truly is unlike any others in the series. But while Masuka was a genius with the confidence to match, that's more than can be said for the Trinity Killer's shunned daughter, Christine Hill. Christine Hill was the secret child of the Trinity Killer. She is introduced as an innocent reporter, but by the end of her story, she would commit murder, attempted murder, and kill herself. The Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell, fathered Christine before he created his new family and false persona as a church-going suburbanite. Because of his own dysfunction and a need to have the perfect family, he shunned her and kept her hidden from everyone he knew. This undoubtedly created the dynamic between them, which included her desperately trying to earn his love and him rejecting her consistently. He remained in contact with her, but this was most likely just to keep her in check and prevent any loose ends. Christine's estranged relationship with her father wasn't enough to stop her from pursuing her professional goals. She was a hard-hitting reporter, and in that role, she broke critical stories that her colleagues could not. She was very determined, and that determination manifested in very unexpected ways. Christine strategically got close to Detective Joseph Quinn during the investigation into Trinity to dig for information and figure out if they were getting close. Due in part to Quinn's loose lips, she soon found what she was looking for. Agent Lundy was closing in on her dad, and she couldn't bear to see him arrested, despite all but figuring out what he was and had been doing for years. That is what led her to shoot Deb and Lundy. Though a strong and capable woman, it's Christine's insecurities that led her to make a series of stupid decisions like that. In actuality, Christine should have had no interest in impressing a father like Arthur. He wasn't just a jerk, he was dangerous, and she knew that, yet she continued vying for his acceptance anyway. She could have had a long and fruitful career in the field of her choice, but instead, she chased after her father's approval. But anyone with eyes could see that that was never going to come. But she somehow did not understand this. Additionally, she could have had a happy relationship with Quinn, but instead, she sabotaged it in her unending quest to gain her father's love. She used their pillow talk to get leads, and she wasn't even subtle about it. Then she shot 2 people and followed Arthur around like a sad puppy until he was eventually killed. Then she killed herself. It's a pity that her life took such a dark turn, but she could have prevented a lot of her own turmoil by making better decisions and getting help. Instead, she spent the best years of her short life hoping to get attention from a man who had abandoned her and murdered dozens of innocent people. It was foolish and illogical, and she was not smart enough or stable enough to realize that in time. Christine was definitely one of the dumbest characters, but Brian Moser was probably the smartest. Despite his unimaginably bad childhood, Brian "Biney" Moser was one of the smartest people in the series. He was able to operate as a serial killer for years without being detected, and even had the upper hand on Dexter for most of the first season. Though Dexter did eventually outsmart him, everyone else who faced Brian was bested every time. He was able to outsmart Sergeant Angel Batista, Detective Deborah Morgan, and the entire Miami Metro Homicide Department for years, and that's the short list. On top of evading police for years, Brian was somehow able to assume a new identity as Rudy Cooper without ever leaving Miami. Unlike his brother Dexter, whose new identity required him to run to another side of the country. On top of that, during the time that he operated as Rudy Cooper, he worked as a skilled prosthetist directly in the public eye without ever being suspected until the 11th hour of his life. The disturbing cat and mouse game Brian played with Dexter was meant to draw his brother's memories out, and he was successful. Dexter eventually remembered everything about their horrible past. This set up the rest of the series, in which Dexter dug further and further into the life and death of his birth mother, Laura Moser, and foster father, Harry Morgan, until finally the truth was revealed. Brian's devious plot did leave him vulnerable to Dexter's own dark urges, and soon he was killed by his own brother. But his intelligence was never disputed. Dexter was just one step ahead of him at the time. Brian was truly brilliant and demented, perhaps the exact opposite of Rita Bennett, the sweetest and dumbest character in the entire series. Rita was a truly gentle soul, what one may call green behind the ears. Her naivety was evident from the very first time she was introduced. Rita was Dexter's girlfriend and eventually his wife, but she had been married before. Her last husband, Paul Bennett, was an awful person who had constantly beat and assaulted her during their marriage. He was also a chronic drug user who would go on benders and neglect Rita and their 2 children whenever he used. Eventually, he went to jail and separated with Rita. But apparently, she just wasn't good at picking men because she ended up with Dexter, a lying, manipulative serial killer. Most people were fooled by Dexter's front-facing persona, but some people who were close enough to him were onto him immediately. Sergeant Dokes, Lila West, even his own father Harry suspected he was off, but not Rita. Somehow, she was blissfully unaware that the man she married and allowed near her children was a deranged serial killer. Clear evidence of Rita's stupidity is shown when she finds Paul's shoe. Dexter was growing more and more annoyed with Paul's effect on Rita, a person he cared for deeply. And one night, when Paul was at their house, he began speaking very harshly about Rita to Dexter. This was following Paul's recent attempted assault on Rita, and Dexter snapped. He hit Paul over the head with a pan and dragged him out of the house. Dexter then brought Paul back to the hotel he'd been staying at, shot him up with drugs, and left him for the police to find. Given the 3 strikes law in Florida, when Paul went back to jail this time, he'd be gone for good. But Paul had been really trying to kick drugs. He knew that he hadn't taken any willingly, so he called Rita repeatedly from jail, begging her to look for any evidence that Dexter had set him up. He told her to look for a shoe that he had lost in the struggle. Rita ignored him for the most part, but eventually she did find the shoe, and she realized there may have been some credence to Paul's story. But by the time she found it, it was too late. Paul was very upset about his predicament, and one day he got into a fight while in jail. He died in that fight. The father of her children died in custody. To the bitter end, she refused to believe that Dexter had anything to do with it. She found the shoe right before Paul died, and she connected the dots right after. Rita went as far as to confront Dexter about his connection with Paul's imprisonment, and surprisingly, he admitted to his involvement. Despite this, somehow Rita's main concern was where Dexter had gotten the drugs to shoot Paul up. She was hardly concerned with the fact that he more or less got the father of her children murdered by framing him and getting him sent to federal prison. Rather, she concerned herself with the idea that Dexter himself was on drugs. It was nothing short of ridiculous. When Rita confronted Dexter, he told her that he got Paul arrested. She asked if he was an addict, and Dexter of course lied to her about being addicted to drugs, rather than admit to being a murderer. Rita hugged him and said they would get him help. This is one of the dumbest responses she could have to figuring out that her boyfriend knocked out her ex-husband, moved his body, shot him up with drugs, and then got him placed in prison where he soon died. Rita was a lot of things. A good mother, friend, and wife, but she was very dumb. If for nothing else, for comforting Dexter after learning all of that instead of distancing herself from him and turning him in. She is quite possibly the dumbest character in the entire show. And in the end, it cost her her life and left her children effectively orphaned.